Hello, beautiful people of the world, and thank you so very much for clicking on my video today. I hope that you very much enjoy it and that you'll stick around so I can give you plenty more tingles, 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 tingles in the future. For today's video, I am going to be reading some true stories of gratitude and inspiration that I thought would be great stories to hear while you're falling asleep, so that your subconscious thoughts can just absorb all those good feelings and wake you up feeling happy and positive and just grateful. So that is my goal with this video, and if you're not sleeping while watching this, then of course I hope this absorbs into your daily life and makes you just that little bit more or a lot more grateful. The reason this is a focus for me today, well, and always, but why it's focus for my video today is because I read somewhere that the happiest people are people who practice gratitude on a regular basis. So that has been my goal since hearing that, and I hope that maybe that's something you can incorporate into your life as well, if it's not something that's been a priority. Today I wanted to make a longer video because I only really have, I think, one video that's over an hour, maybe two, so I wanted to make something a little bit longer because I enjoy longer videos. I don't like when you've got to switch videos and then an ad comes up and you're trying to fall asleep and it just sort of messes with your groove. So I hope that you guys like this longer video and that you enjoyed these gratitude slash inspirational slash feel good stories. Okay, without further ado, here we go. Also, I have my laptop just to this side of me, so for a lot of the video you might just see from here down as I lean forward, and then for certain parts I'll back up, but as you know, I like to be very, very close to my mic when I talk, or when I whisper rather, and my mic is right there. So, as I mentioned, I'll be fairly close throughout the video, and I hope that's okay. Alright, so the first story I have is called If Only Dad Could Be Here, and it's by Edith Patterson Hill of Rockford, Illinois. My father was an astute observer of human character. Within seconds of meeting someone, he could sum up their strengths and flaws. It was always a challenge to see if any of my boyfriends could pass Dad's test. None did. Dad was always right. They didn't pass my test either. After Dad died, I wondered how I'd figure it out on my own. That's when Jack arrived on scene. He was different from any other guy I dated. He could sit for hours on the piano with my mother discussing obscure composers. My brother Rick loudly announced that Jack wasn't a turkey like the other guys I'd brought home. My sister Denise belly laughed with him over Danny Kaye films, and Jack was great with my brother Chuck, who had a mental disability. One time, Chuck put his greasy hands, just dislodged from a cheeseburger, on Jack's shoulders, kissed his cheek with ketchup-covered lips, and called him by the wrong name, shouting, "Ah, Jeff, I love ya." Jack didn't miss a beat. "I love you too, George. Jack passed my family's test, but what about Dad's?" Then came the weekend of my mom's birthday. Jack was coming down from his home in Milwaukee to never see those this time of year. The floors put the corsage in a box. 30. The entire ride, Jack was unusually quiet. "Are you all right?" I asked. We were pulling into my mother's street. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "I might be moving." Moving? When was he going to tell me this? After he packed? Then he added, "Moving in with you." I nearly put the car on the sidewalk. "What?" I asked. "I think we should get married," he said. He told me he'd planned his proposal for a fancy restaurant, but after the accident he decided to do it right away. "Yes," I whispered. We both sat stunned, tears running down our cheeks, unable to speak. I'd never known such a tender moment. If only Dad were here to give his final approval. "Oh, let's just go inside," Jack said, laughing. We got out of the car and he walked up to the driveway carrying the corsage. My mother opened the door. "Happy birthday," we shouted. Jack thrust the box at her. She opened it up. Suddenly her eyes brimmed with tears. Jack and I looked at each other. "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "This is only the second gardenia corsage I've ever received. I was given one years ago, long before you kids were born." "From who?" I asked. "Your father," Mom said. "He gave me one right before we were engaged." My eyes locked on Jack's as I blinked away tears. Dad's test. I knew Jack had passed. That's sweet. This story is called Living from Gratitude by Wendy Betterini. For most of my adult life, I believed that an attitude of gratitude is a good thing to have. As often as possible, I tried to be humble and grateful for the blessings I received, but I didn't fully grasp just how powerful a gratitude practice could be until I set an intention to live from gratitude for an entire day. What does that mean, to live from gratitude? I decided that I would stay in a grateful state of mind and give deep, heartfelt thanks for everything I did, saw, felt, and experienced that day. From the moment I opened my eyes that morning, I began giving thanks for everything and everyone that entered my awareness. I thought about each of my family members and friends and gave thanks for their presence in my life. I gave thanks for my home, my business, my car, my clothing, my health, and my cats. As I moved through my daily activities, I gave thanks for everything I touched, everything I saw or heard, everything I felt, and everything that happened to me, even the annoying and challenging experiences. I gave thanks for our dishes and utensils as I washed them, as well as the water I was washing them in, and for my hands that enabled me to wash them. A few of those items were wedding gifts for my husband and I. And as I washed each one, I recalled our wedding day with joy and gratitude and gave thanks for my husband and the life we shared together. During my business activities that day, I gave heartfelt thanks for my clients and the passionate work that fulfills me and allows most powerful days of my life. All day long, I kept meeting the nicest, greatest people everywhere I went. My income for that day jumped up to roughly 3 times what it normally was without me having to lift a finger to make it happen. I kept noticing awesome opportunities, tools, and resources that would help me grow my business or improve some aspect of my life. Some of these things had been right under my nose all along, but I'd never noticed them before. I received so many great gifts as a result of my day of living with gratitude, but the true gift of that day is the love I felt all day long. Never in my life can I remember feeling so humbled, so blessed, so rich. Everything around me became sacred in ways that I can't even describe. Struggle, strain, anxiety, frustration, fear, anger, they all just faded away. Everything I saw and experienced was uplifting, inspiring, and beneficial. My life was transformed that day into something that I never dreamed would be possible. I thought my life was good before that, but my new attitude of gratitude took it to a whole new level of goodness. That day stands out in my memory as one of the best days of my life. It was so powerful that I've since adopted my living from gratitude mindset as an ongoing intention. Every day I strive to live from gratitude, and each day gets more and more magical the longer I do it. This next story is called She Was 6 Years Old in 1960 When the Nation Watched Her Lead Us into a New Era by Ruby Bridges Hall of New Orleans, Louisiana. In November 1960, I walked up the steps of William Frantz Public School in New Orleans, the first black student at the formerly all-white elementary school. Today I am married and a mother of 4. Many years have passed since that historic day and today. Those years have brought incredible changes in our country, forged in the crucible of the civil rights movement and the battle to end segregation. Years that changed me as well. I was born in Mississippi in 1954, the oldest child of Aben and Lucille Bridges. That year, the United States Supreme Court handed down its landmark decision ordering the integration of public schools. Not that I knew anything about school at the time. What I knew and loved was growing up on the farm my paternal grandparents sharecropped. It was a very hard life though, and my parents heard there were better opportunities in the city. We moved to New Orleans, where my father found work as a service station attendant, and my mother took night jobs to help support our growing family. As I got a bit older, my job was to keep an eye on my younger brothers and sister, which wasn't too difficult, except for church and the long walk to the all-black school where I went to kindergarten. Our world didn't extend beyond that. Was about to change. Under federal court order, New Orleans public schools were finally forced to desegregate. of November 14th, federal marshals drove my mother and me the 5 blocks to William Franz. In the car, one of the men explained that when we arrived at the school, 2 marshals would walk in front of us and 2 behind, so we would be protected on both sides. That reminded me of what Mama had taught us about God, that He is always there to protect us. "Ruby Neal," she said, as we pulled up to my new school, "don't be afraid. There might be some people upset outside, but I'll be with you." Sure enough, people shouted and shook their fists when we got out of the car, but to me, it wasn't any noisier than Mardi Gras. I held my mother's hand and followed the marshals through the crowd, up the steps into the school. We spent that whole day sitting in the principal's office. Through the window, I saw white parents pointing at us and yelling, then rushing their children out of the school. In the uproar, I never got to my classroom. The marshals drove my mother and me to school again the next day. I tried not to pay attention to the mob. Someone had a black doll in a coffin that scared me more than the nasty things people screamed at us. A young white woman met us inside the building. She smiled at me. "Good morning, Ruby Neal." Ruby Nell, she said. Just like Mama, except with what I later learned was a Boston accent. "Welcome. I'm your new teacher, Miss Henry." She seemed nice, but I wasn't sure how to feel about her. I'd never been taught by a white teacher before. Miss Henry took my mother and me to her second-floor classroom. All the desks were empty, and she asked me to choose a seat. I picked one up front, and Miss Henry started teaching me the letters of the alphabet. The next morning, my mother told me she couldn't go to school with me. She had to work and look after my brothers and sister. "The marshal will take good care of you, Ruby Nell," Mama assured me. "Remember, if you get afraid, say your prayers. You can pray to God anytime, anywhere. He will always hear you." That was how I started praying on the way to school. The things people yelled at me didn't seem to touch me. Prayer was my protection. After walking up the steps past the angry crowd, though, I was glad to see Miss Henry. She gave me a hug, and she sat right by my side instead of at the big teacher's desk. Day after day, it was just Miss Henry and me working on my lessons. Militant segregationists, as the news called them, took to the streets in protest, and riots erupted all over the city. My parents shielded me the best they could, but I knew problems had come to our family because I was going to the white school. My father was fired from his job. The white owners of a grocery store told us not to shop there anymore. Even my grandparents in Mississippi suffered. The owner of the land they'd sharecropped for 25 years said everyone knew it was their granddaughter causing trouble in New Orleans and asked them to move. At the same time, there was a few white families who braved the protests and kept their children in school. But they weren't in my class, so I didn't see them. People from around the country who'd heard about me on the news sent letters and donations. A neighbor gave my father a job painting houses. Other folks babysat for us, watched our house to keep away troublemakers, even walked behind the marshal's car on my way to school. My family couldn't have made it without our friends and neighbors' help. And me, I couldn't have gotten through that year without Miss Henry sitting next to her in our classroom. Just the 2 of us, I was able to forget the world outside. She made school fun. We did everything together. I couldn't go out in the schoolyard for recess, so right in that room we played games and for exercise did jumping jacks to music. I remember her explaining integration with me and why some people were against it. It's not easy for people to change once they've gotten used to living a certain way. Miss Henry said, "Some of them don't know any better, and they're afraid. But not everyone is like that." Even though I was only 6, I understood what she meant. The people I passed every morning as I walked up the school steps were full of hate. They were white, yet so was my teacher, who couldn't have been more different from them. She was one of the most loving people I'd ever known. The greatest lesson I learned that year in Miss Henry's class was the lesson Martin Luther King Jr. tried to teach us all. Never judge people by the color of their skin. God makes each of us unique in ways that go much deeper. From her window, Miss Henry always watched me walk into the school. One morning when I got to her classroom, she said she'd been surprised to see me talk to the mob. "I saw your lips moving," she said, "but I couldn't make out what you were saying to those people." "I wasn't talking to them," I told her. "I was praying for them." Usually I prayed in the car on my way to school, but that day I'd forgotten until I was in the crowd. "Please be with me," I'd ask God, "and be with these people too. Forgive them because they don't know what they're doing." Wow. Ruby Nell, "You are truly someone special," Miss Henry whispered, giving me an even bigger hug than usual. She had this look on her face like my mother would get when I'd done something to make her proud. Another person who helped me was Dr. Robert Coles, a child psychiatrist who happened to see me being escorted through the crowd outside my school. Soon he was coming to our house every week to talk with me about how I was doing in school. Really, I was doing fine. I was always with people who wanted the best for me, my family, friends, and in school, my teacher. The more time I spent with Miss Henry, the more I grew to love her. I wanted to be like her. Soon, without realizing it, I had picked up her Boston accent. Neither of us missed a single day of school that year. The crowd outside dwindled to just a few protesters, and before I knew it, it was me. First grade ended much more quietly than it began. I said goodbye to Miss Henry, fully expecting her to be my teacher again in the fall. But when I went back to school in September, everything was different. There were no marshals, no protesters. There were other kids, even some other black students in my second grade class. And Miss Henry was gone. I was devastated. Years later, I found out she hadn't been invited to return to William France, and she and her husband had moved back to Boston. It was almost as if that first year of school integration had never happened. No one talked about it. Everyone seemed to have put that difficult time behind them. After a while, I did the same. I finished grade school at William France and graduated from an integrated high school. I went to business school and studied travel and tourism. For 15 years, I worked as a travel agent. Eventually, I married and threw myself into raising 4 sons in the city I grew up in. I didn't give much thought to the events of my childhood until my youngest brother died in 1993. For a time, I looked after his daughters. They happened to be students at William France. And when I took them there every morning, I was literally walking into my past, into the same school that I'd helped to integrate years earlier. I began volunteering 3 days a week myself. One of the best parts of the story is that I was finally reunited with my favorite teacher, Barbara Henry. She reached me through the publisher of Dr. Cole's book, and in 1995 we saw each other in person for the first time in more than 3 decades. The second she laid eyes on me, she cried, "Ruby Nell." No one had called me that since I was a little girl. Then we were hugging each other, just like we used to every morning in first grade. I didn't realize how much I had picked up from Miss Henry. I still have a hard time calling her anything else. Not only her Boston accent, but her mannerisms too, such as how she tilts her head and gestures with her hands when she talks. She showed me a tiny dog-eared photo of me with my front teeth missing that she'd kept all these years. I used to look at that picture and wonder how you were, she said. I told my kids about you so often. You were like a part of the family. We have stayed a part of each other's lives ever since. It turns out that because of what I went through on the front lines of the battle for school integration, people recognize my name and are eager to hear what I have to say about racism and education today. I speak to groups around the country, and when I visit schools, Miss Henry often comes with me. We tell kids our story and talk about the lessons of the past and how we can still learn from them today, especially that every child is a unique human being fashioned by God. I tell them another important thing I learned in first grade is that schools can be a place to bring people together, kids of all races and backgrounds. That's the work I focus on now, connecting our children through their schools. It's my way of continuing what God set me in motion to do all those years ago when He led me up the steps of William Friend's public school and into a new world with my teacher, Miss Henry. A world that under His protection has reached far beyond just the two of us in that classroom. This next story is called The Complete Audacity of Being Thankful, a powerful true story. Two sisters entered their new home knowing all too well that they'd most likely be killed there. A horrific thought, but an honest one. They entered into a massive room filled with rows and rows of wooden bunks stacked nearly to the ceiling with little room to walk in between. The windows throughout had large gaping holes where glass should have been, an unnerving sight considering it was the dead of winter. As the two sisters climbed and crawled to their top bunk beds so high in the room, it was like the ceiling was giving them a hug. They lay in their straw-covered beds that reeked of urine and mold. Corey stared silently at the ceiling and wondered how she could survive a day in this Nazi concentration camp. Corey and her sister Betsy were Dutch Christians arrested for suspicion of harboring Jewish fugitives, an allegation that was definitely true, even if they never found any of the 6 people they hid in secret, strategically constructed upstairs closet. As Corey pondered her fate, she felt something bite her. She popped out of bed, hitting her head on the wooden slates above. Corey and her sister Betsy clambered down off their beds to escape, their bodies covered with fleas. "How can we live in such a place?" Corey cried to her sister. Everything taken from them, now living in one of the most horrific, evil places in history. Their chance of survival was as likely as getting the guards to transport them to a penthouse suite. How were they going to make it? Betsy had the answer, something she remembered from a Bible verse they had read that morning. She knew the only way they could make it. Her audacious survival strategy: to give thanks for everything about their new lives. concentration camp, Betsy replied. Oh yes, thank you, Jesus, Corey responded. That we were able to smuggle the Bible that's in your hands. And since we're packed so tight in this room, so many women will be able to hear us read it. Betsy looked at Corey to join in giving thanks. All right, thank you for the jammed, crammed, stuffed, packed, suffocating crowds, Corey said. And thank you, God, for the fleas, Betsy responded. The fleas. This was too much. Betsy, there's no way even God can make me thankful for the fleas. Give thanks in all circumstances, Betty quoted. It doesn't say just in pleasant circumstances. Fleas are a part of the place God has put us in. Corey was sure this time Betsy had officially lost her mind. Months in hell and the unexpected amazing. For weeks and months, they worked and survived in a place that was just a quick escalator ride up from hell itself. Yet an amazing thing began to happen. Quite timidly, at nights while soup was being served, Corey and Betsy started reading from the Bible aloud in the back of the massive dormitory room as women clamored around to listen. They would read the Dutch text and then translate it to German, then listen as women repeated the words back through the crowd in French, Russian, Polish, and Czech. It was ripples of hope and light being spoken in a place all too absent of both. With guards everywhere, Corey and Betsy feared of being discovered and the horrific fate that would await them if they did. Yet night after night, they continued. The gatherings became so big that Corey and Betsy held 2 church services a night in the dormitory. Women being filled with courage and strength to face what awaited them at 3:30 a.m. when they would be cattle prodded out of bed for work duty. How many lives were Corey and Betsy saving? Every night they feared a guard would discover them, yet it was like God put a protective force field around them like a talented Jedi Knight. Then one day, while trying to settle a dispute in their dormitory room, Betsy figured out what God's protective force field was all along. She figured out what allowed them to carry out their illegal act of giving hope every night to women who were in desperate need of it. The protective force field. The infestation of fleas. No guard wanted to take a step in their room, lest they get fleas themselves. As Betsy shared her news with Corey, she couldn't help but shine an "I told you so" smile. There was a reason to be thankful for the fleas. Betsy Ten Boom wouldn't survive the Holocaust camp during World War II, but her hope and vision would inspire her sister Corey Ten Boom to keep fighting and find a way out. They share their story in The Hiding Place. Also, in an unbelievable collection of events, Corey continued Betsy's vision for creating a massive post-war mansion that would be a place of healing for those brutalized by the war, both for the victims and for those who had inflicted the pain. Most times we can't see the full picture. Can we give thanks for the parts that have yet to be revealed? How would that change our perspective and our lives if we did? What would happen if we found purpose and redemption not in spite of she always made sure I had what I needed. When I was 6 years old, I was placed in Barachel Christian Academy. That's Barachel Christian Academy, a private school. I did well and was never short of anything. But when I was 13 and about to go to high school, my mother sat me down and asked how I felt about going to Randfontein School, a public school which was more affordable. She struggled hard to get me through primary school, and I figured I would do just as well in public school. I was excited about meeting new friends. It seemed fun. However, things were so different. Girls got pregnant, boys beat each other up. I missed my friends and the fact that everybody used to care. None of us at my high school judged each other. Here, I was in a new place where being cool meant having the most expensive jeans and latest cell phones, being the best. I didn't know who I was anymore. At 13 years old, you need friends to hang out with and to feel liked. I was hanging out with the wrong people. I felt so lonely. I kept chopping and changing friends and became more confused and insecure. I began feeling sad. The feeling got worse. It actually felt painful. Nobody liked me or understood me. I wasn't cool enough. There was nobody to talk to. And anyway, I couldn't describe how I felt because I didn't know what was wrong with me. My mom and I had always been very tight, but she was working so hard for my education and trying her best to care for me that I wasn't going to stress her more by telling her I felt weird inside. I couldn't wake up in the mornings without feeling it was a huge effort. Even something as simple as having a bath became a huge obstacle. I was shoveling food down and gaining weight fast. I was 15 years old when I reached a state of nothingness. I was numb and couldn't even cry. It felt I didn't have any more tears left. One afternoon when I got home from school, I was both sad and angry. My mom is a nurse, so our medicine cabinet was always filled with pills. I headed straight for the medicine chest and took about 30 pills in different colors, sizes, and shapes with a glass of water. I then sat in the dining room and stared out of the huge window facing the street. I could see everyone passing and even into my neighbors. Other school kids were walking home from school and laughing with their friends. I wondered why I couldn't be like them. It was the last thought I remember before feeling dizzy. I went to lie down. At the time, my baby cousin was staying with us, and on that afternoon, she returned from playing with friends and knocked on my window, asking me to open the front door. I managed, but rushed straight back to my room and fell asleep. After a while, I saw a blurry image talking to me, asking if I was okay. Then it hit me that I was alive. I cried, thinking the pills weren't working, and I fell asleep again. My mother returned at 7:30 p.m. after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, and she came into my room and asked why I was still wearing my school uniform. Thinking I was ill with a stomach bug, she gave me water and a pill. I couldn't swallow anything and ran to the toilet where I vomited. I know that saved my life. My mother still didn't know I had overdosed on pills. And the next day when I was sick, she phoned the teacher to say I had a stomach bug. I just slept unable to sad. That just killed me inside. I cried the whole night. My aunt called me and told me never to do that again because the family loves me so much and would hate to lose me. It touched my heart. I felt there was some purpose to my life. I returned to school a week later and told classmates I had been ill with the flu. Months went by, and although I was too scared to try and kill myself again, I often wished my attempt had worked. Then I had a breakthrough. I read a magazine which had an article about a girl who tried to take her life. I still have that article to this day. Everything she wrote was exactly how I felt. There were questions at the end of the article which I answered. The results showed I was in deep depression. I didn't even know there was a word called depression. There was a helpline phone number which I called. I spoke to a counselor at SADAG. He never questioned me, he just understood. I have never felt so free. He listened. He posted me booklets explaining depression and steps to overcome it. I gave the books to my mother, and I asked her if she would let me see a psychologist. My first appointment wasn't easy, but in time I learned to reveal my whole life to the psychiatrist. The more I spoke to the psychiatrist, the better sense it all made. This helped me put the pieces back together, just like a puzzle. I was given antidepressant medication for a few months. I began to confide in a close friend. On days when I didn't want to speak, she understood. I opened up to my mother. Sometimes I woke up angry and sad, and she wouldn't force me to do anything because she now understood about depression. Eventually, I healed, went on to study further, and have a wonderful job. My ordeal has taught me that a person is never alone. Teens nowadays are forced to grow up so quickly. No one gets to be a kid anymore. There's way too much pressure from school and friends. We should be taught life skills at school. What's the point of knowing math and science if you feel empty inside? Amen to that. Right now, life is beautiful. I have bad days, but I am happy to be alive. I thank God every day because everything I need is inside me. I still have a long life ahead, which I'm going to enjoy. Depression is not a person, it's an obstacle that tried to rob me of the joy in my life that I deserve. It rips me apart when I hear a person committed suicide because I know help is there. And that's Lana's story. She didn't provide a last name. This next one is just called A Story of Gratitude by Anthony Ray Hinton. Anthony Ray Hinton spent 30 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. 30 years, imagine that. He was working in a locked factory at the time of the crime he was being accused of. The police told him he would be going to jail because he was black. His time in jail was spent in solitary confinement in a 5 by 7 foot cell. But Hinton quickly became a friend and counselor to the other inmates and the death row guards, many of whom begged Hinton's attorney to get him out. A unanimous Supreme Court ruling ordered his release, and he was able to walk free. In an interview, he is quoted as saying, "One does not know the value of freedom until it is taken away. People run out of the rain. I run into the rain. I am so grateful for every drop just to feel it on my face." Hinton was later interviewed on 60 Minutes. The interviewer asked if he was angry at the people who put him in jail. He said he forgave them all. The interviewer asked, "But or unforgiving for far less suffering, or for circumstances out of anyone's control. Unfortunately, many spend part of their life angry or unforgiving of themselves. Hinton is a strong example of the ability to respond with joy and gratitude despite horrendous circumstances. He's quoted in another interview as saying, "The world didn't give you your joy, and the world can't take it away. You can let people come into your life and destroy it, but I refuse to let anybody take my joy. I wake up in the morning and I don't need anyone to make me laugh. I'm going to laugh on my own because I have been blessed to see another day. And when you're blessed to see another day, that should automatically give you joy." The challenge, it's called, and this is just the next part of this same gentleman's story. Find gratitude every day. There's something to be grateful for every day. As Hinton says, simply seeing another day is something to be grateful for. Sometimes the hardest part is building the awareness. If we're not careful, we go through each day and each week as machines, repeating the same behaviors and tasks. We rarely stop and bring awareness to each moment, each day, and the things we should be grateful for. What if we set a reminder each day this week to bring more awareness to building our gratitude muscle? Set a reminder on your phone. Find a wallpaper image for your phone, or my favorite, pick a doorway in your home and hang a sign that says, "Be grateful." Touch it every time you walk through the door. We spend too much time living in the past and dwelling on things that went wrong. This poisons our actions in the moment and slows our momentum for the future. Gratitude does not make us complacent. It allows us to experience more hope and more abundance in life. We attract more good in our life when we focus on the good that surrounds us now. So go out and get it. Okay, so for the last bit of the video, I have some life stories of people you will know, so like famous or inspiring people that are well known. That was Luna's little snore. She's enjoying the ASMR. These stories are broken down into 3 parts. So it's before, which is like the early stages of their life, the after, and then the lessons. So just bear with me as I read through them. I will be saying, before, after, lessons, if you're wondering why I'm saying those things for the next few stories. It's just the format. Okay, so this is the short story of Princess Diana's life. Early on in her life, Diana's family struggled a lot with their legacy, feeling very stressed and panicked at the lack of a son to continue their family name. They were close with members of the royal family also. This stress would eventually go on to lead to her parents' divorce, meaning Diana had that to deal with at such an early stage in her life prior to her time as a royal. Diana's biggest combat was most probably that of her fight with bulimia whilst an active member of the royal family. She struggled with bulimia mainly due to the hollowness of her marriage to Prince Charles, rather than solely insecurities like the royals had assumed at the time. She struggled immensely with her marriage to Charles, with him supposedly having consistent affairs with his past lover. This being especially highlighted with their remarriage upon Diana's passing. The emptiness of Diana's marriage was something that left her with great feelings of worthlessness, and with remarks that Charles had made to her in reference to her chubby figure a week after the engagement. was when she had thrown herself into a glass cabinet, highlighting her struggle with mental illness at a time when she was crying out for help from somebody. After, Diana would often visit homeless shelters as well as terminally ill patients in hospitals. However, she would resent the media attention that her life and these visits received, and would often visit in the evening and later at night to avoid these kind acts being wrapped in media attention, showing the good intentions of her heart. She also helped ease the stigma surrounding HIV-positive people at the time, with many fearing even interacting with those who had contracted the dreadful disease. She broke these boundaries by embracing a person known to have the disease. She also would go on to pursue and support a campaign set on banning the use of landmines in combat. This campaign aimed to ban landmines due to their common nature to cause post-combat deaths, with many of the injured from these remaining landmines being children. She set out on a campaign to an abandoned minefield in Angola, which now bears fruit due to the Ottawa Treaty, which has since banned the use of landmines in combat, which she no doubt played her role in doing. She would die young tragically, but that did not stop her passing on her unique mindset to her sons William and Harry. Harry especially took the torch in continuing the legacy his mother had left behind in terms of breaking royal protocol and boundaries to do what is right. Harry's now wife Meghan Markle has had comparisons drawn to Diana in many ways for the way she conducted herself as a royal, despite their very public step back from royal duties. Just gonna disagree with that comment, but that's okay. So, the lessons we should learn or could learn from Princess Diana's death. Number 1, be kind. Princess Diana had found herself in a privileged position in life, and despite battling her own demons, was self-aware enough to realize this. Her acts of selflessness and kindness to those worse off than her in her life, in homeless shelters and hospitals, for example, even when the media was not watching, was something that we can all admire, to treat people how we would want to be treated, regardless of our current situation, their background, or the background we ourselves are from. Second lesson, break barriers regarding what others will think. Being a royal, Diana had many protocols that she was expected to adhere to during her time as part of the royal family. However, she ignored many of these. She would break the barriers, as previously mentioned, when it came to the stigma surrounding HIV-positive infected people by embracing them, as well as breaking barriers in terms of supporting the end of political campaigns, such as pursuing the banning of landmines in warfare. She was a woman who was not conservative enough to hide her thoughts and was always truthful when speaking her mind regarding any topic. Despite the grip that being a royal family member can often have around one's neck, she was a revolutionary figure whose life was tragically cut short early on in her lifetime. The next true life story we have is on Keanu Reeves. Keanu was abandoned by his father at the early age of 3. He last met his father when he was 13. As a result, he was raised by a single mother. However, she was not single often, being remarried 4 times during Keanu's childhood, resulting in much of his childhood being raised by his grandparents. He struggled with schooling due to constantly being moved from school to school, as well as having learning difficulties as a result of his dyslexia. He was even expelled from school on one occasion. It's in Keanu's adult life where the true tragedy begins, though, with the loss of his closest and best friend, River Phoenix, in 1993 at the hands of a drug overdose. This was something that had left Keanu understandably devastated. This pain of loss would become all too familiar for Keanu when he lost his child in 2001 when it was stillborn. This loss was also something that would ultimately cost him his relationship with the love of his life, Jennifer Syme. 18 months after their split, he would find out that she'd been killed in a car accident. These are the moments that will have left Keanu with the most devastation. However, despite these being events that would dominate, Keanu had managed to manage or completely overcome many of the setbacks he has faced in his life. He overcame his sporadic and inconsistent childhood to pursue his career in acting, amongst other endeavors. He most notably starred in The Matrix in 1999, that became a game changer for both Keanu and movies in terms of defining genres and special effects. He has also starred in multiple John Wick movies, with his appearance becoming defining of the character, as well as more recently voicing the character Duke Kaboom in Toy Story 4. He has also had a major role in one of the most anticipated AAA video games of 2020, with his role in Cyberpunk 2077, as well as becoming a known internet meme and just being generally adored by the internet as a collective for his wholesome, inspirational, and iconic moments throughout the years. He has also funded leukemia hospitals and cancer foundations in general, amongst other charitable organizations. His link to funding the fight against leukemia comes from when his younger sister was diagnosed with the illness, before eventually managing to overcome it. We love Keanu in Canada. We love him. So what can we learn from Keanu's life story? Number 1, your past does not define you. This is one of the lessons that can resonate with many people. Keanu came from a troublesome background with a specific and ever-changing household. A sporadic and ever-changing household. Sporadic. Ever-changing household and schooling situation. His lack of a father figure and often ignorance from his mother could have easily led him down the wrong path. However, he did not let the circumstances of his past define what he could achieve in the future. Lesson number 2, you can overcome anything. Negatives can still be positives. Keanu has had to overcome some of the scariest and most terrifying circumstances that anybody would have to face. The loss of a child is the most disgustingly tragic thing that any person can face, but on top of that, losing his relationship and then the love of his life altogether is something that many people would never recover from or forgive the world for allowing. However, when Keanu speaks, he speaks in a positive and uplifting tone and is always perceived as one of the men of Hollywood who can brighten up your day despite the terrible ordeals he has had to endure throughout his life. His gratitude is the recognition that negatives in life can always birth positives regardless of the situation. Alright, our next true story here is on Marilyn Monroe. Just got a couple of these left and then we're all done for today's video. But we're not done yet, don't worry. So, Marilyn Monroe, her real name is Norma Jean, of course, struggled with her family life very early on, never getting to know who her biological father was, as as well as being passed around orphanages and foster homes due to her mother's inability to fund or look after a child at the time. Her family had a history of mental illness, which would eventually begin to show in Marilyn early on in her life, showing significant signs of paranoia and delusional thoughts. As an example, Marilyn believed that her neighbors had murdered her beloved dog and sliced him in half when they had accidentally hit him in the street one day. She witnessed her first significant trauma in relation to death in 1950, when her then boyfriend had passed away. The whole ordeal is what really sent Marilyn on a downward slope very quickly. Lytis, a woman who worked for Marilyn and shared a home with her, would return one night not too long after Marilyn's boyfriend has passed to find her sprawled out on the bed, white as a ghost with her mouth filled with sleeping pills. Marilyn enforced that this was not a suicide attempt. However, the warning signs were beginning to show with what Marilyn was struggling with mentally. Come the 60s, Marilyn's depression had gotten so bad that she would on many occasions not even be able to bring herself to sit up, having to do her makeup lying down even. It was clear that Marilyn has got to the point of no return mentally at this stage. Not too long after, in 1962, Marilyn had been tragically found dead in her apartment, and with a history of drug use and a heavy reliance on pills and medication, it was labeled as a suspected suicide at just the heartbreaking young age of 36. It had seemed that the writing was on the wall for this tragic end to Marilyn Monroe's short life, when her demons had eventually gotten the better of her. However, despite her life's tragic ending, there was plenty for Marilyn to be proud of during her short time on Earth. She had overcome her troublesome childhood to beat the odds in a rapid rise to stardom, being labeled the fastest rising star of 1952. Just a year later, she was given the title of Sweetheart of the Month for the famous Playboy magazine. She was also renowned for her acting ability, obtaining nominations for BAFTA awards on 2 occasions in 1956 and 1958, as well as a Golden Globe nomination for her role in Bus Stop. She would star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1962, the year of her passing, and would go on to be ranked as the 6th most influential female superstar of all time, just before the turn of the millennium, cementing her place in history. However, she was most known for her boundary breaking in terms of sexuality and how society at the time and even now views and accepts sexuality, proving to become an icon in that area of the world of entertainment. She was a revolutionary for sexual acceptance. Lessons. Marilyn Monroe's life had gotten off to an awful start, with a background in childhood that for most people would define the rest of their life and career. Despite this, Marilyn rose from the ashes of her childhood and achieved levels of fame that few people have ever since matched. She still remains a legendary figure in pop culture almost 60 years after her passing. Lesson 2. Sexuality is subjective, and you should embrace it. Marilyn Monroe was brought up in a very patriarchal world where men dominated. She was also brought up in a very conservative world for women, with sexuality being viewed as something that was to be frowned upon. Despite this, Marilyn broke the barriers and would go on to redefine what the views on sexuality were to be seen as. With her role in embracing her sexuality, no doubt having an impact on the world we live in today, where sexuality, or lack thereof, being something that is embraced by many all over the world, not chomp at the bit to give him a job opportunity academically either. As a result, to get by in life, he had to work several jobs just to survive. Around the time Albert's father passed away, and he passed thinking of his son as a complete failure in life, this knowledge of his father's thinking of him left Albert absolutely heartbroken. Later in his adult life, Albert had to divorce his wife and lose access to his kids just to focus on what he believed in. In his work, he was hell-bent on proving that light can indeed bend, which of course many other academics felt he was delusional for thinking. Without any family and with the stress of his work piling on, Einstein began to fall ill both mentally and physically. This was not timed well, with his work having to be put on the back burner due to the beginning of World War II. Being a German Jew left Einstein in constant fear for his life and survival too during this time, meaning there was little time to relax whilst not working. Eventually, Albert would go on to achieve wild success in the scientific field and finally get to the stage of proving his doubters wrong. He would go on to prove that gravity is a pushing force instead of it being previously considered a pulling force. As well as this, he would go on to be the man to answer the question in regards to why the sky is blue and what decides this in 1910. He concluded that the phenomenon was to be known as critical opalescence, and it proved that this effect is causing the scattering of the light in the sky's atmosphere where individual molecules are splitting. This is what led to the discovery of the reasoning of the sky being blue. To further his reputation, Einstein would eventually receive one of the highest and most prestigious awards possible when he won the Nobel Prize in 1921 for his paper that determined that light was merely a collection of particles. This discovery from Einstein opened up an entirely new avenue for his fellow academics and the world of science in the field of quantum physics to paths and ideas that had previously been pushed away as delusional or were completely unexplored. However, what most probably encapsulates Einstein's scientific and academic career, and what he is still most known for today, is his theory of relativity, or the idea that E equals mc squared. This discovery was what lit the scientific world alight in ways that Einstein never expected he could do. This discovery opened a broadened landscape of what previously was thought in the subject of physics at an academic and scientific level. Despite the fact that it took a number of years, stress induced from work, Albert Einstein himself, before his ideas and theories on this subject were recognized to be true by his fellow physicists. Einstein lost so much at the hands of following what he believed to be true. He gave up everything he had in life on the path to prove what his heart felt was right. He had been labeled delusional